The Civil War changed the history of the United States in general, but Georgia in particular, and Marietta was one of the most affected cities in the entire nation. Now, one of the largest battles, in fact the second largest battle of the Civil War, took place not too far from here. Can anyone tell me where? Right there, yes, absolutely. Kennesaw Mountain, if you see that chapel right in the background over there, that is Kennesaw Mountain. And that is where the battle took place, and it was an ingenious battle plan on the Confederates' part. What happened was, when the Union soldiers started moving into Marietta, they decided to set up all their battalions in the mountains and force them to come to their battleground. In so doing, the Union soldiers were actually bottlenecked in between the mountains. And anytime the Union soldiers made a pull for any kind of other ground to stand on, all that the Confederates had to do was roll around the mountain, keep the high ground, and force them to relocate. In a series of 3 days, 3,000 Union soldiers were killed compared to 1,000 Confederates. However, the Union had about 6,000 soldiers more than the Confederates did, and eventually the Confederates had to resign the battleground. Now, that's 4,000 bodies, if you're doing the math, that have accumulated over a series of 3 days, and all of them need to be taken to holy ground for burial. You can't bury soldiers on battleground. So if you're going to move 4,000 bodies, what form of transportation would you use? And I'll give you all a hint. Yes, good, very good. Smart crowd tonight. Now, where do you think that they would bring them? And I'll give you a hint. We're taking a tour of Marietta tonight. Good, all right. You can't get anything past this one. Yeah. But they're all brought back here to Marietta. It was said several times throughout the war that there were more dead in Marietta than living, and to this day that still remains true. I'll be mentioning these soldiers several times throughout the night. Now, over my other shoulder here is the Root House, and it is known by us at the Ghost of Marietta Ghost Tour as the house that moved, which is a lot less creepy when I just explained it was rolled on logs 2 blocks from its original location. But yes, this is the Root House, built by Mr. William and Mrs. Hannah Root. Mr. William Root was one of the first merchants here in Marietta, and in fact the first pharmacist. His shop is now, was where Marietta Pizza Company stands today. They lived together in that house with their family of 9. And they all slept in the same bedroom. To make matters worse, they only had 4 beds. To make matters even worse, Grandma Root got her own bed. Mr. and Mrs. Root got to share a bed together. And the 6 Root children got to sleep along the other 2 beds long ways. Now, this is not really the best environment to be in the time of cholera and this kind of disease, so when one of the young Root boys fell ill, they had to move the entire family downstairs into the living area while the young man was tended to. Every single day, Mr. William Root would make several trips back and forth between his pharmacy and home, bringing new medication that came in off the trains, concoctions he was creating, anything to try and rejuvenate his son. But eventually that young man did fall more and more ill with each day and eventually passed away. Unable to live with the memory of him in that house, they abandoned the house, and it stands today as the Root Museum. The reason they left the building standing is that it's the oldest frame house in Marietta. It was built in 1840, and they have restructured the building but turned it into this museum today, which you can go inside, and many of the rooms have remained as they were when the Roots were living there. Now, it's said, and it's particularly around dusk, so this is a good time to be here, that if you look at the top left window, some people claim that they see an orb, a light appear and disappear. Other people, and I've heard people make this claim, that as they're standing here, see a woman looking out and then walk away. That museum is closed, ladies and gentlemen. There is no one in there. If you see a face up in that window, it is believed to be Mrs. Root, looking for her husband to be coming back from the pharmacy with the medication that her son would so desperately need. And in that desperate time, she would walk back and forth several times over a series of a few hours. Another story from the director of the museum that's very interesting. She says that every night they like to do the same routine. They like to flatten out the straw mattresses, fluff up the pillows, dust up the antiques, lock up the building for the night. When they come back in the morning, however, in the Root's bed, Mr. and Mrs. Root's bed, there's this indentation that appears almost overnight, as if someone had been sitting there for the duration of before they left. Possibly Mrs. Root, where she would have sat mourning the loss of her son, or where Mr. Root would have sat holding his sick and dying child, trying to give him the life he so desperately needed. We're not entirely sure which, but there's most certainly a presence in that house, so feel free to stop in, but be careful what you touch because you don't know who it belongs to, and they might want it back. So we're going to move on to our next location.